Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her military uniform for the third time that morning. The fabric felt heavy against her shoulders, not from its weight, but from the invisible burden she carried every day. At 24, she had already served 2 tours overseas, but nothing had prepared her for the battle she faced within her own unit. The morning briefing room buzzed with conversation as soldiers filed in, their boots echoing against the concrete floor. Sarah entered quietly, her head held high despite the knot forming in her stomach. She had earned her place here through blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights, yet she felt like an outsider looking in through glass. Captain Reynolds stood at the front, shuffling through papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this routine 1,000 times. His voice boomed across the room as he began the daily assignments, calling out names and duties with mechanical precision. Sarah listened intently, waiting for her name to be called for something meaningful, something that would utilize the skills she had fought so hard to develop. Johnson, you'll take point on the equipment inspection. Miller, coordinate with the logistics team. Thompson, handle the new recruit training. The names continued, each assignment carrying weight and responsibility. Sarah's heart sank a little deeper with each name that wasn't hers. When Captain Reynolds reached the end of his list, Sarah raised her hand tentatively. The room fell silent, and she could feel dozens of eyes turning toward her. Some looked curious, others annoyed, and a few seemed to look right through her as if she weren't there at all. "Sir, what about my assignment?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. Captain Reynolds barely glanced up from his papers. "Martinez, you can handle the filing in the administrative office. Make sure everything gets properly sorted." His tone was dismissive, as if he were giving instructions to a clerk rather than a trained soldier with combat experience. Sarah felt the familiar sting of disappointment wash over her. She had graduated top of her class from military academy, earned commendations for her performance in the field, and consistently scored higher than many of her male counterparts on physical and tactical assessments. Yet here she was, being relegated to paperwork while less experienced soldiers received meaningful assignments. As the briefing ended and soldiers began filing out, Sarah remained seated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She watched as Johnson clapped Thompson on the back, already discussing strategies for the equipment inspection. Miller was deep in conversation with 2 other soldiers about logistics coordination. The camaraderie was obvious, but it was a circle that never seemed to include her. Standing up slowly, Sarah made her way to the administrative office, a small, windowless room tucked away in the corner of the building. The space smelled of old paper and stale coffee, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead with an annoying persistence. Boxes of files sat stacked against one wall, and a metal desk occupied most of the remaining space. As she began sorting through the paperwork, Sarah's mind wandered to her childhood. She had grown up in a military family, listening to her father's stories about honor, duty, and service. He had always told her that in the military, what mattered was your skill, your dedication, and your willingness to serve. He had never mentioned that sometimes none of that would matter if you didn't fit the expected mold. The first few hours passed slowly. Sarah organized reports, filed documents, and tried to find meaning in the mundane tasks. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of training exercises, tactical discussions, and the general buzz of military life. She longed to be part of those conversations, to contribute her knowledge and experience to something that mattered. Around midday, Sergeant Williams entered the office carrying another box of files. He was a veteran soldier with 20 years of service, and Sarah had always respected his straightforward approach to leadership. Unlike some of the others, he at least acknowledged her presence. "How's it going in here, Martinez?" he asked, setting the box down with a heavy thud. "Fine, sir. Just getting everything organized," Sarah replied, hoping her frustration didn't show in her voice. Williams paused for a moment, studying her face. "You know, I remember when I first joined up. Felt like I was swimming upstream most of the time. Takes patience to find your place." Sarah nodded politely, but inside she wondered how much patience was too much. How long should she wait for her colleagues to recognize her capabilities? How many times should she prove herself before someone finally took notice? After Williams left, Sarah continued her work in silence. The afternoon stretched on endlessly, and she found herself checking the clock more frequently than she cared to admit. Outside, she could hear the sounds of vehicles moving, equipment being tested, and soldiers engaged in the real work of military operations. As the day drew to a close, Sarah finished organizing the last of the files. Her uniform was still crisp, her posture still straight, but something inside her felt worn down. She had joined the military to serve her country, to make a difference, and to prove that she belonged among the ranks of those who protect and defend. Instead, she found herself filing papers while watching others receive the opportunities she craved. Walking back to her quarters that evening, Sarah passed by the training grounds where several soldiers were conducting evening drills. She paused to watch, observing their techniques and mentally noting areas where she could offer improvements based on her own experience. But she knew that offering suggestions would likely be met with polite dismissal at best, or outright hostility at worst. In her small room, Sarah sat on her narrow bed and pulled out a worn photograph of her father in his military dress uniform. His proud smile and confident stance reminded her of why she had chosen this path. She had wanted to follow in his footsteps, to earn the same respect and recognition that he had achieved through years of dedicated service. But her father had never faced the particular challenges that Sarah encountered daily. He had never been questioned about whether he belonged in a combat zone, never had his physical capabilities doubted despite his proven performance, and never been excluded from important discussions about strategy and tactics. Sarah placed the photograph on her small nightstand and began preparing for the next day. Tomorrow would bring another morning briefing, another round of assignments, and another opportunity to prove herself. She had to believe that eventually someone would notice her contributions and give her the chance she deserved. As she lay down to sleep, Sarah made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue to do her job with excellence, regardless of how small or insignificant the task seemed. She would maintain her professionalism, her dedication, and her hope that things would change. Because somewhere out there, she believed, was someone who would see her true potential and give her the opportunity to serve her country in the way she had always dreamed. The room fell quiet except for the distant sounds of the military base settling into nighttime routines. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push away the doubts that crept into her mind. Tomorrow was another day, another chance, and she would be ready for whatever came her way. She had to be, because giving up wasn't an option. Not for her, not for her father's memory, and not for the young women who might follow in her footsteps someday. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first day in the administrative office, and the routine had become painfully familiar. Each morning brought the same dismissive assignments, the same polite but distant interactions with her colleagues, and the same growing sense that her talents were being wasted. The filing cabinets were now perfectly organized, every document in its proper place, but Sarah felt increasingly out of place herself. On this particular Tuesday morning, the briefing room carried an unusual tension. Word had spread that there would be a surprise inspection by higher command, and everyone seemed more alert than usual. Sarah took her customary seat in the back row, hoping that perhaps today would bring a more meaningful assignment. Captain Reynolds entered with his usual brisk efficiency, but his expression was more serious than normal. Behind him walked Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, a stern-faced woman in her 40s who commanded respect with her very presence. Sarah had heard stories about Barnes, how she had worked her way up through the ranks despite facing many of the same challenges that Sarah now encountered. "Listen up, everyone," Captain Reynolds began, his voice carrying an edge of nervousness. "As you can see, we have Lieutenant Colonel Barnes with us today. She'll be observing our operations and conducting evaluations. I expect everyone to perform at their highest level." Lieutenant Colonel Barnes stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the room. I'm here to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of this unit. Over the next few days, I'll be reviewing your procedures, observing your training exercises, and evaluating how well you work together as a team. Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Perhaps this inspection would provide an opportunity to showcase her abilities beyond filing and administrative tasks. She had been preparing for such a moment, staying current with tactical manuals, maintaining her physical fitness, and keeping her skills sharp despite the lack of challenging assignments. As Captain Reynolds began distributing the day's assignments, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Colonel Barnes watching the process carefully, taking notes on a small pad. The usual names were called for the usual important tasks, and Sarah braced herself for another day of paperwork. Martinez, Captain Reynolds called, barely looking in her direction. Continue with the administrative duties. Make sure all the quarterly reports are properly formatted. Sarah's heart sank, but she noticed something interesting. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes had stopped writing and was now looking directly at her. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Sarah saw something in the older woman's expression that she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't pity or sympathy, but rather a kind of recognition, as if Barnes understood exactly what Sarah was experiencing. The briefing concluded, and soldiers began dispersing to their various duties. Sarah was gathering her things when Lieutenant Colonel Barnes approached her. "Soldier Martinez, isn't it?" Barnes asked, her voice crisp but not unkind. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, snapping to attention. "I'd like to review some of your files and previous performance evaluations. Can you have them ready for me by this afternoon?" "Absolutely, ma'am. I'll have everything organized and ready for your review." Barnes nodded curtly and walked away, but Sarah caught a glimpse of something that might have been approval in her expression. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a surge of genuine optimism as she made her way to the administrative office. Spending the morning pulling together her files, Sarah was reminded of just how strong her record actually was. Her performance evaluations were consistently excellent, her training scores were among the highest in her class, and her overseas service records detailed several situations where her quick thinking and tactical knowledge had made a real difference. Reading through her own accomplishments, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and frustration. On paper, she was exactly the kind of soldier that any unit would want. Her superiors in previous assignments had praised her leadership potential, her technical skills, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Yet somehow, none of that seemed to matter in her current assignment. That afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes arrived at the administrative office promptly at 1,400 hours. She spent nearly an hour reviewing Sarah's files, asking pointed questions about specific incidents and decisions. Unlike the cursory review Sarah was used to receiving, this felt like a real evaluation of her capabilities and potential. "Tell me about the incident in Kandahar," Barnes said, referring to a situation during Sarah's second deployment where she had helped coordinate an emergency evacuation. Sarah straightened in her chair. "We received intelligence about a possible IED in a civilian market. The area needed to be cleared quickly, but quietly to avoid panic. I suggested using a medical training exercise as cover, which allowed us to move civilians out systematically without revealing the true nature of the threat. And the result? The area was cleared in under 20 minutes. The bomb disposal unit later confirmed that there were actually 2 devices, not 1. If we had used standard evacuation procedures, the panic might have triggered a premature detonation." Barnes made a note on her pad. "Who was your commanding officer during that operation?" "Major Harrison, ma'am. He later recommended me for a commendation for tactical innovation." "Which you received," Barnes observed, flipping through the files, "along with several others. Your record shows consistent performance above and beyond expectations." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but also a growing confusion. If her record was so strong, why was she being wasted on administrative tasks? Why weren't her current superiors utilizing her skills and experience? Barnes seemed to read her thoughts. "Sometimes, soldier, the best way to assess a situation is to observe it from the outside. I've been watching this unit for months, and I've noticed some concerning patterns in assignment distribution and resource utilization. The older woman closed the files and looked directly at Sarah. I want you to participate in tomorrow's tactical exercise. I'll be speaking with Captain Reynolds about reassigning you to Lieutenant Thompson's squad for the duration of my evaluation. Sarah's heart leaped. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. I don't expect you will, Barnes replied. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't charity or special treatment. I'm making this assignment because I believe your skills are being underutilized, and I want to see what you're truly capable of when given the appropriate opportunity. After Barnes left, Sarah sat alone in the administrative office, hardly able to believe what had just happened. For the first time since arriving at this base, someone in authority had actually looked at her record, assessed her capabilities, and made decisions based on merit rather than assumptions. That evening, Sarah spent hours preparing for the tactical exercise. She reviewed the terrain maps, studied the mission parameters, and mentally rehearsed various scenarios that might arise. This was her chance to prove herself, and she intended to be ready for whatever challenges came her way. As she prepared her gear, Sarah thought about Lieutenant Colonel Barnes and what had motivated her intervention. Barnes clearly understood the frustration of being overlooked and underestimated. Perhaps she had faced similar challenges during her own career and was now in a position to help others avoid the same obstacles. Word of Sarah's reassignment had apparently spread through the unit, and the reactions were mixed. Some soldiers seemed genuinely curious to see what she could contribute, while others appeared skeptical or even resentful. Sarah could hear whispered conversations in the hallways, speculation about whether she had somehow complained to the visiting officer or pulled strings to get a better assignment. The criticism stung, but Sarah tried to focus on the opportunity ahead. She had spent weeks watching from the sidelines, observing the tactical exercises, and noting areas where different approaches might be more effective. Tomorrow would be her chance to contribute meaningfully to the team's success. Lieutenant Thompson, who would be leading her squad during the exercise, stopped by her quarters that evening. He was a fair-minded officer whom Sarah had always respected, and his expression seemed genuinely welcoming. "I've been reviewing your background, Martinez," he said. "Looks like we'll be lucky to have you on the team tomorrow. I'm particularly interested in your experience with urban warfare tactics." "I'm excited for the opportunity to contribute, sir," Sarah replied. "Good. We'll be briefing at 0600 hours. Get some rest. Tomorrow's exercise is designed to be challenging, and we'll need everyone at their best." As Thompson left, Sarah felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for, and she was determined to make the most of it. Tomorrow would be a chance to show her colleagues what she was truly capable of, and to prove that her abilities extended far beyond organizing files and formatting reports. Lying in bed that night, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation that she hadn't experienced in weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to contribute, and perhaps the beginning of a different kind of military career. For the first time since arriving at this base, she fell asleep with a smile on her face, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. The morning air was crisp and filled with anticipation as Sarah made her way to the briefing area at 0545 hours. She had been awake since 0430, double-checking her equipment and running through tactical scenarios in her mind. This was her moment, and she was determined to make it count. Lieutenant Thompson was already at the briefing table when she arrived, studying topographical maps spread across the surface. Two other soldiers from his regular squad, Corporal Jensen and Private First Class Rodriguez, were examining equipment lists. They looked up as Sarah approached, their expressions neutral but curious. "Good morning, Martinez," Thompson said without looking up from the maps. "Take a look at this terrain and tell me what you see." Sarah stepped closer to the table, studying the contours and markings carefully. The exercise area included a mock urban environment with several buildings, natural obstacles, and multiple approach routes. She could see immediately that this wasn't going to be a simple point-A to point-B scenario. The terrain offers multiple concealment opportunities, but also several potential choke points, she began, tracing routes with her finger. The main approach is obvious, which makes it the most dangerous. The eastern route looks challenging, but provides better cover, and this building here could serve as either an observation post or a defensive position, depending on the scenario. Thompson nodded approvingly. What about extraction points? 3 viable options, Sarah replied, pointing to different locations on the map. The primary extraction zone here is ideal, but might be compromised if the mission goes long. These 2 alternate positions offer different advantages, depending on wind direction and enemy positioning. Corporal Jensen, a stocky man with 10 years of service, leaned in closer. You think like someone who's actually been in the field, he observed. Not like someone who's been pushing papers. I've done both, Sarah replied simply, but I prefer the field work. The full briefing began at 0600 hours with Captain Reynolds addressing all participating units. The exercise would simulate a hostage rescue scenario in an urban environment. Multiple teams would be working simultaneously, with some acting as hostiles, others as civilian populations, and several teams tasked with rescue operations. Sarah's squad was assigned to Alpha Team, responsible for securing a key building and providing overwatch for the primary rescue operation. This exercise will test your ability to adapt to changing conditions, Captain Reynolds explained. Scenarios will evolve in real time, and teams will need to communicate effectively and think on their feet. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes will be observing and evaluating all aspects of the operation. As the teams moved out to their starting positions, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with tactical operations. Even though this was a training exercise, her body and mind shifted into the focus state that had served her well during her overseas deployments. Thompson's squad took their initial position in a wooded area overlooking the target building. Through binoculars, Sarah could observe the structure and the surrounding area, noting details that might become important as the scenario developed. Martinez, what's your assessment? Thompson asked quietly. Building appears to have 3 floors with multiple entry points. Windows on the second floor suggest it might be used as an observation post. The placement of those barrels near the entrance could indicate obstacles or improvised defensive positions. And, sir, I think there might be a sniper position on that water tower to the northeast. Thompson adjusted his binoculars to look where Sarah was pointing. I don't see anything. Small reflection, about every 30 seconds. Could be scope glare, or it might be intentional misdirection to draw our attention away from the real threat. Jensen was now also looking through his scope. She's right. There's definitely something up there. The radio crackled with initial reports from other teams. The exercise was beginning, and Sarah could hear the careful coordination between units as they moved into position. This was the kind of work she had trained for, the environment where her skills and experience could make a real difference. 20 minutes into the exercise, the scenario began to evolve. Reports came in of additional hostile contacts, and the original rescue plan needed to be modified. Thompson's squad was ordered to reposition and provide support for a team that had encountered unexpected resistance. We need to move fast, but stay quiet, Thompson said. Martinez, you take point. Use that urban warfare experience. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she took the lead position. Moving carefully through the terrain, she used hand signals to guide the squad around obstacles and potential danger zones. Her previous experience in similar environments had taught her how to read the subtle signs that indicated safe passage versus potential threats. As they approached their new position, Sarah noticed something that made her freeze. She raised her hand to halt the squad and pointed toward a cluster of bushes about 50 meters ahead. Something wasn't right about the way the vegetation was arranged. Using hand signals, she communicated her concerns to Thompson, who moved up beside her. Together, they observed the area for several minutes before Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. A member of the opposing team was concealed in that position, waiting to ambush any unit that used the obvious approach route. How did you spot that? Rodriguez whispered. The leaves are the wrong color for this season, and the spacing is too uniform, Sarah replied quietly. Natural growth doesn't look that organized. Thompson made the decision to circle around the concealed position, using Sarah's knowledge of urban camouflage techniques to avoid detection. The maneuver worked perfectly, and they were able to reach their objective without triggering the ambush that would have compromised their mission. From her new position, Sarah's squad provided crucial overwatch as other teams executed the rescue operation. Sarah's sharp eyes and tactical knowledge proved invaluable as she identified additional threats and provided real-time intelligence to the teams on the ground. Alpha Team, this is Bravo Leader. We're taking fire from the second floor, northeastern corner, came an urgent radio call. Sarah was already tracking the muzzle flashes. Alpha Leader, I have eyes on the position. 2 hostiles, second floor, using the window for cover. They're focusing on the main approach and haven't noticed the service entrance on the building's south side. Can you provide suppression? Came the reply. Negative on direct fire, but I can create a distraction. Give me 30 seconds. Working quickly, Sarah used her knowledge of urban tactics to create a diversion that drew the hostile team's attention away from the rescue operation. It was exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that she had become known for during her overseas service, and it worked perfectly. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, with scenarios becoming increasingly complex. Sarah found herself naturally falling into a leadership support role, providing tactical advice and spotting threats that others missed. Her squad worked together seamlessly, with each member contributing their unique skills to the team's success. When the exercise finally concluded, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes appeared at their position. She had been moving between different teams throughout the operation, observing and taking notes. Her expression was unreadable as she approached Sarah. Interesting work out there, Martinez, Barnes said. Your squad leader tells me you identified 3 separate threats that other teams missed entirely. Just doing my job, ma'am. Your job today was significantly different from your job yesterday. How do you explain the difference in your performance? Sarah considered her answer carefully. Ma'am, I believe people perform best when they're given opportunities to use their skills and experience. Today, I was able to contribute in ways that my training and background prepared me for. Barnes nodded slowly. And yesterday? Yesterday, I filed reports, ma'am. I see. Barnes made a few notes on her pad. Carry on, soldier. Debrief will be at 1,500 hours. As Barnes walked away, Thompson approached Sarah with a broad smile. Outstanding work out there, Martinez. I haven't seen tactical awareness like that in a long time. Where did you learn to read terrain like that? Kandahar province, mostly, Sarah replied. You learn to notice details when your life depends on it. Jensen clapped her on the shoulder. I owe you an apology. I thought you were just another desk jockey who got lucky with an assignment. I was wrong. We all make assumptions, Sarah said diplomatically. What matters is whether we're willing to change our minds when we get new information. The rest of the day passed in a blur of equipment cleaning, report writing, and informal discussions about the exercise. Sarah found herself included in conversations that had previously excluded her, and several soldiers asked her opinion on tactics and techniques. For the first time since arriving at the base, she felt like a valued member of the team. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her gear and prepared for the next day, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed in just 24 hours. The opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities had transformed not only how others saw her, but also how she saw herself within the unit. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Barnes and the courage it had taken for her to intervene on Sarah's behalf. Barnes had seen potential being wasted and had taken action to correct the situation, despite the risk of stepping on toes or challenging established patterns within the unit. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she felt a sense of satisfaction that had been missing from her military service for weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself, but tonight she could rest knowing that her skills and dedication had finally been recognized. The filing cabinets would have to wait. There was real work to be done. The debriefing session that afternoon revealed just how significantly the dynamics within the unit were beginning to shift. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes had arranged for a comprehensive review of the exercise, with detailed analysis of each team's performance and decision-making processes. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being asked to contribute to the discussion rather than simply observing from the sidelines. The conference room was packed with soldiers from all participating units, and Barnes stood at the front with a large screen displaying tactical maps and performance metrics. Captain Reynolds sat in the front row, his expression difficult to read as Barnes began her presentation. Today's exercise revealed both strengths and areas for improvement within this unit. Barnes began. I want to highlight several instances where superior tactical thinking made the difference between mission success and failure. Sarah's pulse quickened as Barnes clicked to a slide showing the urban terrain map. Alpha Team's identification and neutralization of concealed threats prevented what could have been a catastrophic ambush. The soldier who spotted these positions demonstrated exactly the kind of field awareness that we need to cultivate throughout the unit. Several heads turned towards Sarah, and she felt a mixture of pride and self-consciousness. She had always been taught to let her work speak for itself, but having her contributions recognized publicly felt both validating and slightly overwhelming. Barnes continued her analysis, discussing communication protocols, equipment utilization, and coordination between teams. But Sarah noticed that she kept returning to examples that highlighted the importance of utilizing all available resources and recognizing talent regardless of its source. One of the most significant observations from today's exercise, Barnes said, looking directly at Captain Reynolds, is that this unit has untapped potential that isn't being fully utilized. Soldiers with valuable skills and experience are being assigned to tasks that don't leverage their capabilities. The room fell silent. Everyone understood that Barnes wasn't just making a general observation about military efficiency. She was pointing out specific problems with leadership and resource allocation within their unit. After the formal debriefing concluded, smaller groups formed to discuss specific aspects of the exercise. Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to know more about the techniques she had used to identify concealed positions and predict enemy movements. "How did you know they would use that building as a sniper nest?" asked Sergeant Murphy, a veteran with 15 years of service. "Experience and pattern recognition," Sarah explained. "In urban environments, elevated positions with good sight lines are almost always utilized for overwatch. The key is thinking like your opponent and asking what you would do in their situation. And the camouflage position in the bushes. Vegetation that's been disturbed or artificially arranged has a different appearance than natural growth. Once you know what to look for, it becomes easier to spot. It's like reading a language. You start to recognize the grammar and syntax of camouflage." These conversations continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah sharing knowledge and techniques that she had accumulated over years of training and deployment. For the first time, her colleagues were seeing her as a resource rather than an inconvenience, and the change in atmosphere was remarkable. As the group began to disperse, Lieutenant Thompson approached Sarah with a serious expression. "Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I want you to give me a straight answer." "Of course, sir. How long have you been capable of the level of performance you demonstrated today?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Since before I arrived at this base, sir." Thompson nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of. We've been wasting your talents for weeks while complaining about being understaffed and undertrained. That's not acceptable. Sir, I don't want to cause any problems. You're not causing problems, Martinez. You're highlighting problems that already existed. There's a difference." That evening, Sarah was surprised to receive a message requesting her presence at Lieutenant Colonel Barnes' temporary office. As she made her way across the base, she wondered what this meeting might involve. Had she somehow overstepped boundaries during the exercise? Were there consequences for performing too well when it highlighted deficiencies in unit leadership? Barnes' office was a converted conference room with a temporary desk and filing cabinets. Despite the makeshift nature of the space, Barnes had managed to create an environment that felt both professional and approachable. "Sit down, Martinez," Barnes said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. I want to discuss your future with this unit. Sarah sat down carefully, maintaining her military posture despite her nervousness. Yes, ma'am. I've been reviewing personnel files and performance records across multiple units, and I've identified some troubling patterns. Talented soldiers like yourself are being systematically underutilized, while less capable personnel are given opportunities for advancement and meaningful assignments. Barnes leaned back in her chair. What I witnessed today confirmed what I suspected based on your records. You have tactical skills and leadership potential that this unit desperately needs, but you've been relegated to administrative tasks for reasons that have nothing to do with your capabilities. Ma'am, I try to prove myself, I know you have, and that's part of the problem. Soldiers shouldn't have to overcome artificial barriers to contribute to their unit's success. Good leadership means recognizing and utilizing talent, not hiding it in filing cabinets. Barnes pulled out a folder and opened it on her desk. I'm recommending you for immediate assignment to Lieutenant Thompson's squad as a permanent team member. Additionally, I'm recommending you for advanced tactical training that will prepare you for leadership responsibilities. Sarah felt her heart racing. These were the opportunities she had dreamed about, the chance to finally use her skills in meaningful ways. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. I'm not doing this as a favor, Martinez. I'm doing it because the military needs soldiers like you in positions where they can make a real difference. But I want you to understand something important. Barnes leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. The changes I'm implementing here will face resistance. Some people are comfortable with the status quo, even when it's inefficient and unfair. You may encounter pushback, resentment, and attempts to undermine your new responsibilities. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because this isn't just about your career anymore. Other soldiers are watching to see what happens. If you succeed, it opens doors for others who have been overlooked. If you fail, it reinforces the prejudices that created this situation in the first place. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for her own recognition anymore. She was carrying the hopes of other soldiers who had faced similar challenges. I won't fail, ma'am. I believe you won't. But success means more than just performing well individually. You need to help change the culture of this unit to demonstrate that merit and capability are what matter most. Barnes handed Sarah a set of orders. Your new assignment begins tomorrow morning. Thompson is expecting you, and he's been instructed to give you progressively more responsibility as you demonstrate readiness for it. As Sarah reviewed the paperwork, she saw that Barnes had also arranged for her to attend a leadership development course in 6 weeks. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that could accelerate her military career and open doors to positions she had only dreamed about. Ma'am, may I ask why you've chosen to take such an active interest in my situation? Barnes was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a note of personal experience. 20 years ago, I was a young soldier with good training and strong performance records. I spent 2 years filing papers and making coffee while watching less qualified soldiers receive the assignments I wanted. What changed? A general took notice. He saw that talent was being wasted and took action to correct the situation. He gave me opportunities to prove myself, and when I succeeded, he made sure I got the recognition and advancement I had earned. Barnes stood up, signaling that the meeting was concluding. Now I'm in a position to do the same thing for others. It's not about charity or special treatment. It's about building the strongest possible military by utilizing all available talent. Walking back to her quarters that night, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation and responsibility that was both exhilarating and daunting. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new phase in her military career, one filled with the kinds of challenges and opportunities she had always sought. She thought about the conversation with Barnes and the revelation that even senior officers had faced similar obstacles during their careers. It was somehow comforting to know that the struggles she had experienced weren't unique, but it was also sobering to realize how many talented soldiers might have been lost to the military because they never received the same kind of intervention. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah made a mental note to remember this moment and these feelings. Someday, if she achieved the kind of success and influence that Barnes had attained, she wanted to remember what it felt like to be overlooked and underutilized. She wanted to remember the importance of recognizing talent wherever it appeared and giving everyone the opportunity to contribute to their fullest potential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to prove that merit and capability were the only qualifications that truly mattered. Sarah was ready to meet those challenges head-on, not just for herself, but for all the soldiers who would follow in her footsteps. 6 months had passed since that pivotal day when Lieutenant Colonel Barnes first observed Sarah's capabilities during the tactical exercise. The transformation within the unit had been remarkable, though not without its challenges and setbacks along the way. Sarah now stood in the same briefing room where she had once sat in the back row, waiting for meaningful assignments that never came. But today, she occupied a very different position. As squad leader for Alpha Team, she was responsible for briefing junior soldiers on an upcoming training operation. The irony wasn't lost on her as she looked out at the eager faces, some of which reminded her of her younger self. Today's exercise will test your ability to adapt to changing conditions and work as a cohesive unit, Sarah explained, pointing to the tactical maps displayed on the screen. Remember that the best plans are worthless if you can't communicate effectively and support each other in the field. Among the soldiers listening intently was Private Chun, a recent graduate from Military Academy who had arrived at the base 3 weeks earlier. Sarah had noticed that Chun possessed exceptional analytical skills and tactical awareness, but she had also observed some of the same dismissive attitude from other soldiers that Sarah herself had once faced. After the briefing concluded, Sarah approached Chun. "How are you settling in, Private?" "Fine, ma'am." Still learning the routines and procedures. Sarah studied the younger woman's expression and recognized the careful diplomacy of someone trying not to complain. "What assignments have you been given so far?" "Mostly administrative support and equipment maintenance, ma'am." "I see. And how do you feel about those assignments?" Chun hesitated, clearly uncertain whether honesty was advisable. "They're important duties, ma'am. Every job contributes to the unit's mission." Sarah smiled at the diplomatic response. "That's true, but it's not what I asked. Walk with me, Private." As they walked across the base, Sarah shared some of her own experiences from her early days with the unit. She described the frustration of watching others receive opportunities while being relegated to filing and administrative tasks, despite having the skills and training to contribute more significantly. "The thing is, Private, everyone deserves the chance to contribute to their fullest potential. That means recognizing talent wherever it appears and ensuring that assignments are based on capability rather than assumptions." "Ma'am, are you saying that I should complain about my assignments?" "Not all. I'm saying that you should be prepared when opportunities arise, and that you should never doubt your own worth based on how others initially perceive you." Over the following weeks, Sarah made it a point to observe Chen's performance and look for opportunities to showcase her abilities. When a complex logistics problem arose that required creative problem-solving, Sarah recommended that Chun be included in the team tasked with finding solutions. The results were impressive. Chen's analytical approach and attention to detail helped identify inefficiencies that had been overlooked for months. Her suggestions led to significant improvements in equipment distribution and maintenance scheduling, saving both time and resources. Captain Reynolds, who had initially been resistant to many of the changes implemented by Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, began to take notice. The unit's overall performance had improved dramatically since talent began being utilized more effectively, and even the most skeptical soldiers were beginning to acknowledge the benefits. "Martinez," Reynolds said during a private meeting, "I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with your actual performance." "Sir, we all make assumptions sometimes." "Yes, but leaders shouldn't. I let my preconceptions prevent me from utilizing a valuable resource, and that was a failure of leadership on my part." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes has recommended you for promotion to lieutenant. The paperwork is already in progress. Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but also a sense of responsibility. The promotion would give her even more opportunities to influence unit culture and ensure that other soldiers didn't face the same barriers she had encountered. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't. But I want you to know that this promotion isn't charity or an attempt to correct past mistakes. You've earned it through consistently outstanding performance and leadership. The promotion ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning, with the entire unit assembled to witness the occasion. As Sarah stood at attention while the lieutenant's bars were pinned to her uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, who had returned to the base specifically for the ceremony, delivered remarks about the importance of recognizing and developing talent within military units. Her words carried particular meaning for Sarah and the other soldiers who had benefited from the cultural changes she had implemented. Leadership isn't about maintaining the status quo, Barnes said to the assembled soldiers. It's about constantly seeking ways to improve performance and utilize every available resource. Today we celebrate not just one soldier's achievement, but the success of an entire unit that has learned to value merit above all other considerations. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by several junior soldiers who wanted to congratulate her and seek advice about their own careers. Among them was Private Chun, whose confidence had grown considerably since being given meaningful assignments. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for believing in me when others didn't," Chun said. "You earned every opportunity you received, Private. I just made sure those opportunities were available. It makes a difference knowing that someone is watching for talent rather than just looking for reasons to exclude people." Sarah nodded, remembering her own gratitude toward Lieutenant Colonel Barnes. That's the responsibility of leadership, to create an environment where everyone can contribute to their fullest potential. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed. From filing papers in a windowless office to leading tactical operations and mentoring junior soldiers, her military career had finally found its proper trajectory. But perhaps more importantly, the culture within the unit had evolved in ways that would benefit soldiers for years to come. The changes implemented by Barnes had created a system where assignments were based on capability rather than bias, where talent was actively sought out and developed, and where every soldier had the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the unit's mission. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing a letter to her father. She wanted to share the news of her promotion, but also to tell him about the lessons she had learned about perseverance, the importance of allies, and the responsibility that comes with achieving success. "Dad," she wrote, "I've learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but within our own institutions. The fight for recognition and opportunity requires the same courage and determination as any other military operation, but the victory benefits everyone." She paused, thinking about Lieutenant Colonel Barnes and the courage it had taken for her to challenge established patterns within the unit. It would have been easier to simply observe problems and file reports, but Barnes had chosen to take direct action to correct injustices she witnessed. "I've also learned that success creates responsibility," Sarah continued writing. "When you achieve recognition and advancement, it's not enough to simply enjoy the benefits. You have an obligation to ensure that others have the same opportunities you fought to obtain." Looking out her window at the base, where she had experienced both frustration and triumph, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to lead and mentor other soldiers. There would always be problems to solve, injustices to address, and talent to develop. But tonight, she could rest knowing that her perseverance had paid off, that her contributions were valued, and that she was helping to build a military where every soldier had the opportunity to serve to their fullest potential. The filing cabinets in the administrative office would continue to need organizing but that work would now be distributed fairly among soldiers, who would also have opportunities for meaningful assignments that utilize their unique skills and talents. As she finished her letter and prepared for sleep, Sarah smiled at the thought of the young soldiers who would arrive at the base in coming months and years. They would find a unit where talent was recognized, where opportunities were distributed based on merit, and where every soldier had the chance to contribute to something larger than themselves. It had taken courage, perseverance, and the intervention of a wise general to create this change. But the transformation was complete, and its benefits would extend far beyond any single soldier's career. The culture of recognition and opportunity that had been established would serve the military well, ensuring that no talented soldier would ever again be relegated to filing papers while their abilities went unrecognized and unused. The battle for recognition had been won, but more importantly, the war for a better, more equitable military culture had achieved a significant victory that would benefit countless soldiers in the years to come.